Okay, so now we're going to start talking about water, electrolytes, and acid base. We finished up the kidney. So this picture is our usual picture that refers the urinary system to the remainder of the other systems within the body and how it works with them. So how do we maintain our water volume? So on the average, every day, the kidney filters about 180 liters of blood. And at any given time, as we said, we got about 25% of our cardiac output in our kidneys. It involves the removal of waste by reabsorbing. It returns needed substances from the filtrate back to the blood secretion. Think about it as our chemical engineers. They're always adjusting the content or the composition of our blood. And under normal circumstances, intake equals output. There are three main fluid compartments, and I'm just going to go to this picture here. Okay, so we have, actually I'm going to go to this picture first. Intracellular, all that's combined by the cell. Extracellular, which is all the fluid outside the cell. Of the extracellular, we have the largest being interstitial. If we think about intracellular, we said that it's all inside the cell. It's about 63%, or I think about 60% of our body weight. It's about 63% of our total body water. It's about 40% of our body weight and about 25 liters. Extracellular refers to everything else outside of the cell. So that takes in the most part being our interstitial fluid, our plasma, which is the water part of our blood, our lymphatic, which is the liquid portion of our lymph fluid. We have another grouping called transcellular, and transcellular makes up our serous fluids around our membranes, our joint fluids, our eye, the fluid in our eyeballs, that sort of thing. Collectively, our extracellular fluids about 37% of our body water, or 20% of our weight, and 15 liters. So going back to this picture now, we want to look at interstitial fluid. So our interstitial fluid is the fluid that floats between our cells. So just imagine it like just enough water for them to float in nicely, about 12 liters, 80% of our extracellular space. The plasma is about 3 liters, and that's the liquid portion of our blood. Remember, we only have 5 liters of blood altogether. So that makes up 15 liters. This makes up 20, which gives our 40 liters. So very often I always say like 40 bags of milk. All of these spaces, we're going to go back here, contain electrolytes. But the main electrolyte is potassium inside the cell and sodium outside the cell. I'm just going to go to the picture. Sorry. No, don't have that picture. I'm sorry. How do we get our fluids? We're going to go back to here. How do we get our fluids? The most we get by mouth, moist foods, so celery, cherry pie, whatever. Most foods have some water. When you cook macaroni and rice, it has water in it. And of course, we make a little bit of water through our metabolism. What about our output? Our largest source, of course, is urine. These two usually equalize each other. Stool, again, it depends on your quality and quantity of stool that you put out. So if you put it out 3 times a day, it's a lot more water in it than if you put it out 3 times a week. Perspiration, again, depends on how much you exercise, what kind of environment you live on. We have a little bit of diffusion and, of course, evaporation through our lungs. Our primary regulation is through thirst. When we have an increased osmolarity or molality, our blood is thick. So the particles, there's more particles in our blood than there is in comparison to water. So that sends a message to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus tells us we're thirsty. It's as little as a 1 to 2% loss that causes us to get a drink. What happens is our stomach distends, and the impulses get triggered, and we get a thirst mechanism happening. and that tells us the thirst. Once we take in enough water, then it stops. So I always like to think, when you're on the playground, when you're in elementary school and you're so thirsty and you're just hoping the teacher will let you go get a drink at the fountain, and you get to the fountain and you just drink and drink and drink, and all of a sudden you feel full. That's because those mechanisms are getting triggering from the brain saying you've had enough water now to replace your losses. A water loss regulation, primarily it's the kidneys and the production of urine that control our water loss. We've already talked about the kidney and the job of the collecting ducts and the tubules, and they are fairly impermeable to water unless we secrete ADH. And remember, ADH, like any hormone, has three things: a stimulus, which is increasing osmolality or dehydration, the increasing osmolality of our blood or dehydration, and the message is conserve water at the kidney level, and the target tissue is the distal tubules. So if ADH is inhibited, then urine production increases. There's our first clip done.